Good morning, everyone. I'm going to give it another minute or so, and we'll be kicking off very, very shortly, just to allow as many people to join as possible. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Morgan Hunt webinar, Fertility Insights, Balancing Health and Wellbeing in the Workplace. My name is Claire Canary, and I'm a director at Morgan Hunt, and I lead on diversity and inclusion both internally and externally. For those of you who don't know us, Morgan Hunt is an award-winning UK recruitment business. We have over 125 recruiters across London, Birmingham, Manchester and Glasgow. We were founded over 30 years ago, and we specialise in recruiting in the charity, further education, government, housing, construction and property, social care and technology sectors. I will host this morning's session, but I am delighted to be joined by an expert panel for this really important conversation. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Becky Kearns. Becky is a campaigner and fertility advocate. She co-founded Fertility Matters at Work. Becky has a professional background in HR and has combined that with her own lived experience leading the workplace fertility campaign group with the aim of providing statutory rights in the workplace for those going through fertility treatment. We'll also be joined by Stephanie Daniels. Stephanie is founder of Life Begins at Menopause. She also uses her professional background in the media as an executive coach and now offers well-being and some nutritional advice to individuals at every stage in their career. And our final panel member is Sean Greenway, who is a male fertility coach and advocate. He is also draws on his own lived experience and his own fertility challenges and heartache when there was no support network for men, and is now as a proud father of twins. Sean shares his story to provide a voice for other men experiencing infertility. So before we kick off our conversation this morning, I just want to outline the kind of structure of our session. Our main discussion will last about 45 minutes and hope to leave about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to answer any questions you as an audience may have. So please, at any stage during our conversation, if you have a question, do post it in the YouTube chat function. We will see all your questions, and time allowing, we'll endeavour to cover as many as possible. So to kick off our conversation, can I ask you all to briefly talk us through your own fertility journey and to give us your perspective on this topic? So to kick off, Becky, if I could start with you, please.
Yeah, so my fertility journey started when I was 28 actually. I was working in a HR role, and I had the diagnosis of early menopause, which came as a huge shock. And myself and my partner wanted to have children. We were told that to do so, we would need to go through IVF, and we would need to do so quickly because my egg reserve was so low. And so I was very much sort of catapulted into the world of fertility treatment, and realized at the time that I, as an individual, had no idea what that entailed from a physical perspective, emotional, but also financial as well. And actually, myself as a HR professional didn't know what that entailed. But to cut a very long story short, we went through 5 rounds of IVF. I did get pregnant on the first round, but sadly miscarried at 8 weeks. And then the subsequent cycles just didn't work for me. And so we had to consider a different route to parenthood. We eventually went down the route of egg donation. And I've now got 3 amazing girls, all thanks to egg donation. And I now share my story. I started as a patient advocate, talking openly because I realized just how alone I felt whilst going through that experience. And I wanted to kind of offer that hope and support to others. So I've founded a platform called Paths to Parenthood, which is a support platform for donor conception. And then also combining my HR experience, have co-founded Fertility Matters at Work, which is where I am today with that hat on, talking to you.
Great. Thank you, Becky. That all makes sense. And Stephanie, from your perspective?
Hi Claire, nice to be back with you. Mine was a different perspective. I fell pregnant with my first son, Johnny, and when I was 8 months pregnant with my second child, I lost my mum, unfortunately, to ovarian cancer. And so I found myself in a situation where I was giving birth without her by my side, and saying goodbye to a mother-daughter relationship. And then at the same time, I had my daughter 2 months later, and so started a new mother-daughter relationship, which was very beautiful. Soon after that, I got tested for the BRCA gene, which is the one that makes you more susceptible to getting breast or ovarian cancer, because that's the gene that my mum had. And the results came back as positive. So I had a choice to either do nothing and carry on as I was, or to have preventative surgery to stop that ever happening. And because I'd seen what had happened with my mum, and I have my two kids, I didn't want them to suffer the same fate and see what I'd been through. So I had a double mastectomy, which on paper was a 10-hour surgery and should have been the hardest one to deal with. But following that was an oophorectomy, where your ovaries are taken out. And I had the decision then to kind of not only have my ovaries removed, but to cut off ever getting pregnant again. And so I went through this period of having to let go of that, an emotional kind of grieving period of letting go of that choice. And I didn't realize how much it was going to affect me. It came and went. I did deal with it, and I did process it, but I faced it. And then I had my oophorectomy. And by smashing into a surgical menopause and coming up for air and realizing how little support there was, I set up Life Begins at Menopause by overcoming my symptoms.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. That's quite different. And Sean, from your perspective?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. So, like many couples, my wife and I, after 4 years of marriage, we decided that it would be time to start expanding our family, and we assumed it would come easily and naturally. And after about a year of trying with no joy, where the pressure just mounted month on month, and the sex became more and more planned and structured, it continued to not happen. So we went to the doctors, and we both got referred for tests. And I then received a phone call that told me I had to go for a second sperm analysis, because then the person who was delivering the news then stumbled over the word azoospermia. I didn't know what that was. I asked, what is that? And she said, I don't know. It just says I need to book you in for another test in 3 months. So I said, okay, thanks very much. And got off the phone, got onto Google to find that meant that I had no sperm, zero sperm. But I was, just thinking men have tens of millions of these things and I've got none. So yeah, from that point onwards, really, then just got kind of thrust into this whole new world of infertility and everything that comes with that, the shock, the heartache, the trauma. But then as a man, the stigma as well. The second test ran along the same lines. I had no sperm, and yeah, I just went through years really of grief, a really strange grief where there was no one else to talk to. I looked around, I couldn't see any of them. I couldn't find any other men talking about it. I couldn't see any online. There was no groups, no support at all. I was very much out on a limb. And after navigating that for years and moving through having operations, and then towards the end, my wife and I elected to use donor sperm, and we were gifted with our beautiful twins, Ray and Evelyn, in 2021. But I didn't just stop there. I felt compelled to go back and be what I needed, and be that male voice, and start sharing my story to let other men know they're not alone. And so I started sharing my story on Instagram, and it's just kind of gone further than I ever could have imagined, really, from there on.
Hard to believe, though, that was not that long ago. And you're saying that there was pretty much no other men out there really discussing this. And that's crazy given the figures on male infertility as well. So we know there are men going through this, but they're just not sharing their story, and there's nowhere to go.
Absolutely, yeah. So 2017 we started trying, and no men. And yeah, the statistics from the World Health Organization are that 1 in 6 people will suffer infertility, and out of that, it's pretty much 50-50 split between men and women as to where the attributable problem may arise, may lie.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And Becky, kind of to go back, I suppose, to the kind of key theme of our conversation, and obviously your focus in terms of a lot of the work you do. How do kind of fertility challenges and going through fertility treatment and maybe even dealing with infertility, what do you see that in terms of the impact on a person's individual mental and emotional well-being at work?
It can have a huge impact, and often you can talk about the practical physical process of going through treatment, which is a challenge at work. But I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with is the impact to mental health. And we know from a study by Fertility Network UK that 90% of those going through fertility challenges will experience anxiety or depression. So a huge number. And it can be really hard for people going through this to put into words what that feels like. But it really is grief. And we think about fertility loss as a grief of something that hasn't happened, as opposed to the grief of maybe losing a loved one about whom you've got memories and photographs and is validated. And so when you're experiencing this potential loss, it's often something that you have held in your mind from being a young child. I remember playing with my dolls. I always imagined that I would be a mum. So to have that potential future and that future identity taken away was really life altering. And I always describe it as though nothing really changes on the outside, but everything changes on the inside. And I can see Sean nodding as well, that realization that maybe you can't be who you thought you were going to be as a parent. Yet at the same time, you've still got to keep coming into work and you're delivering, and you often have those phone calls like Sean mentioned, and then you've got to go and present to a room full of people. You've got to put your face back on. And so when we're talking about the workplace, it's all about bringing our whole selves to work. And whether or not it is that month after month of trying and the disappointment each time, or whether it's an early loss, or whether you're now navigating treatment, it is a real roller coaster of grief and hope, and can be quite all consuming as well. I remember very much being all consumed by my own journey. So I think we have to think of this as a situation and an issue that is directly linked to mental health. And there are things that organisations can do to support that individual throughout their working life, and join up the dots with existing emotional support as well within workplaces. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more around the practical things a little bit later on.
Yeah, it makes sense. But just having to get back in the game straight after a really difficult or challenging conversation, from a doctor, go back in and just try and perform at work is really difficult. Sean, I mean, from your perspective, because as a man, it seems like it's particularly lonely because it's almost like nobody's talking. And there is a lot of stuff online, and there has been over the last few years around, female infertility. So what are the, I suppose, the mental well-being effects of balancing those fertility treatments that you were going on with your partner, with the demands at work? I suppose in terms of your focus, your motivation, your productivity, how did you practically find it during that time?
It's literally like a roller coaster. So like I mentioned that phone call, I was at work when I received that literally life-changing news. And then I remember phoning my wife to pass it on. And of course, she was in shock as well. And she said, well, should we go home? Shall I see you at home? And I said, no, it's fine. I'll go back in the office. I'll see you at home. You just went back in. And for 18 months, I put on that brave face. But that's on the exterior. On the inside, I was going through just so much pain and grief and anger, low mood, depression. And it's exhausting, because infertility is like a spectre that's always there, no matter what you're doing, no matter how much fun you're having, no matter how engaged you are. It's just present in the back of your mind. It's the next appointment coming up, or how am I going to get to that, like from a work perspective, because fertility clinics are mostly open Monday to Friday. A few exceptions here and there, but I went through periods, I say like a roller coaster, because I went through periods where I was all in. And the reason I was doing that at work was to try and escape the pain that I was in. Or there were other times where I was just mentally drained and I had nothing to give. So rather than being a nice kind of steady line of productivity, it was just ebbing and flowing, like really a crazy level, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably kind of, we mentioned grief, but it is very similar to that. And actually, when you are grieving or you're going through that you're either doing that, you're either trying to bury yourself in work, or else it's really difficult to keep that face going. So that makes sense. And Stephanie, from your perspective, given that you coach a lot of individuals around well-being, a little bit of nutritional advice all the time, there's a lot during this process that people can't control, and particularly for women dealing with, say, early menopause. So can you explain personally how you kind of found your equilibrium again? Because you talked about the fact that you had to actually make an active choice to stop, I suppose, your active fertile years. How did you find that balance again?
It was a journey, and it came from a place of being absolutely flawed. And what Sean says resonates so much, because we're running on empty and we're kind of showing up at work with one face, but underneath there's cracks that start to appear. And what happens when those cracks start to appear is that they kind of have a ripple effect to your everyday life. So you could be showing up and doing what you think is your best work, but it's going to affect your health, it's going to affect your stress levels, it's going to affect, from a biological point of view, it's going to affect how you detox things, because our body is, it's like going on the motorway with no petrol and you're just slamming on the accelerator hoping that it's going to run smoothly. And from my own point of view, when I went kind of public, for want of a better word, with my story, I had a few people say to me, I can't believe you went through this. I had no idea. But there are so many people who are going through this, and the more and more corporates, the more and more people that I work with, the more and more open questions that I pose and give people the space and the time to answer those questions, you realize what's going on under the surface. And once we start talking about this, and once we start sharing our inner truth, that's when change can happen. Because when we're at work, we're so focused on the job in hand, on showing up, on being our best, on being a yes person, having no boundaries. But once we bring the two together, the under the surface truth with what's going on outside, then that's when the magic can really happen. And so for me, it was about being open about what I was going through, listening to others and what they were going through, and then facing symptoms one by one. So, I guess the crossover with hormones and fertility is that there are fundamental things that you can put in place to stop your hormones being disrupted, whether that's looking at what you're eating from a nutritional point of view. Some of the food that we are eating cannot even be considered as food. And so I always invite my clients to look at the back of the packet, because on the front is where the marketing team is. And their claims of pulling out all the extracting all the best bits of the food, contains vitamin C, contains vitamin D, will make you X, Y, and Z. My husband's a marketer's dream. He'll walk into Holland and Barrett and see the protein and say, well, it's going to give me muscles. It's like, well, look at the back. Look at the ingredients that you're putting in, because these ingredients are going to disrupt your hormones. And I have to respect here what Sean is saying, because it doesn't matter what Sean eats, right? He is going to experience his experience. So I don't want to be tone deaf to what Sean is experiencing. There are different parts to this. But as a whole, you can become familiar with what food is doing to you. And then there's other things like mindset and detoxing. If we're not detoxing properly, so if we're not breathing properly, and we're not shallow breathing, we're breathing from up here, it's going to be an acidic environment internally. So it's about breathing and sleeping. When we sleep and we have a deep and restful sleep, our brain detoxes the day before, and it's like the save button on what happens. So I learned this over time, and then I took this to the corporates and the clients I work with, and the magic starts happening.
Thanks, Stephanie. And yeah, you're right. Obviously, there are certain conditions. You're not going to change scientifically anything by eating, but I guess it's just trying to find that balance with so much else going on, trying to find some way of making yourself feel more human and maybe not eating ultra processed foods, all the stuff we know that we should be doing. And Becky, from your perspective, because obviously you're on a journey now with this campaign and pushing for those statutory rights, but how flexible are current workplace policies regarding time off for fertility, or any other formal systems that you've seen work well for individuals facing fertility challenges?
Well, as we know, there's currently no statutory rights for time off for fertility treatment. So, like you would have that right to go for an antenatal appointment, you haven't got that right when it comes to a fertility treatment appointment. And for anybody who doesn't know, fertility treatment appointments can be really difficult to plan for. They can be quite last minute, they can be quite regular. Often there isn't a fertility clinic on every corner, so you have to factor in travel time. And actually, we know that 61% of people don't feel comfortable telling their employer. So this is where it starts to impact the workplace. We know from some research we did a few years ago that almost 70% took sick leave whilst going through treatment. And anecdotally, that was to hide the fact that they were going through fertility treatment. So disclosure is a big, big issue here. And I know Sean said that for the first 18 months, he didn't say anything and went through this in silence and was really, really trying to keep things going, be present at work, but also go through fertility treatment. And fertility treatment is like a whole other full-time job in itself. But I think what's really important when we talk about policy, so employers don't need to wait for legislation to put things in place. And there are lots of flexible working policies in place now. We found from our research, still around 70% of organisations don't have a specific policy for fertility, which is something we are looking to change, whether it's policy or whether it's guidance. And so I would encourage anyone who's watching this after this event to go and search as an employee, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who has found out they need fertility treatment, type in fertility or IVF and see whether something comes up. And some of the common things we see are that there might be one line that's hidden maybe within the maternity policy, which isn't ideal when that's what you're wanting to achieve but can't. When you have to go digging through the maternity policy, it's a bit like, this is what you could have had. It's difficult. So it's the accessibility of it that's really important, but also the language as well. This is a people issue. It's not just a woman's issue. It's not just couples that go through this. There can be individuals going through solo parenthood now. Also the LGBTQ plus community who more and more are looking to have children and go through fertility treatment. So you need to think about whether or not, if there is anything in writing, does that recognise what somebody's going through? But the key thing somebody will be looking at is, does my employer recognise and support the fact that I'm going through fertility treatment? If not, they're more likely not to say anything and not to open up. And do they provide flexible working or paid time off to allow me to attend appointments? And some of the amazing work that we've been doing at Fertility Matters at Work with employers is to put that inclusive policy guidance in place, which is your foundation, really. It's that signal to say, we are going to support you through this. And it is a temporary period, doesn't need to open up the floodgates, but what it can do is make such a significant difference to somebody who is already going through a challenging time, as we've mentioned, in helping to lift the burden of having to then also maybe hide it from work at the same time. So yeah, there's lots employers can do. The majority won't have a policy or anything in place, but you can change that and that will make such a difference.
Yeah, I think it's times of those high emotional stress that employees really appreciate that just extra support and those well-being policies, because that's kind of what it's wrapped around. And the skill shortage that we're still experiencing across the UK, well-being around employees becoming more important. So hopefully fertility policies gets pushed up that agenda. Thanks, Becky. I mean, Sean, from your perspective, I don't know whether your own fertility challenges when you were working, full-time or in a kind of regular role, did that influence the decision to take time off or reduce hours? And if so, did you worry, how that would be perceived by colleagues and management in terms of, people in maybe high profile roles in organizations feel like they can't because they might be judged?
So yeah, I mean, like Becky mentioned, I think I said earlier, for 18 months, I hid it completely, and I was taking sick leave, annual leave, trying to change my working hours around. There wasn't a remote policy in place at the time. It was obviously like pre-COVID, and yeah, certainly in my role, it was you're in the office, and so it massively affected my career in general. I wasn't taking other opportunities that arose because I needed to stay with what I knew, even though they didn't know. I knew that I had a certain amount of kind of guarantees there, and flexibility around knowing what I can and can't do, if you know what I mean, like change of shifts. So when it came, what happened in the end for me, so I had to tell them, because it got to the point where I was going to undergo one, if not two operations. So it went from needing to kind of get an hour or two here or there, or a morning or an afternoon, to suddenly needing to have a day off and a bit of recovery time. The first one being quite minor and maybe needing 3 or 4 days, but the second one, if I needed it, which I did, was going to be 4 weeks. And there was no way I could have hidden that, especially not when, yeah, of course it's certificated leave, but when the certificate from the doctor says scrotal surgery, there's not much room to hide there. So I was almost forced into disclosing it, and I was so glad I did, because at that point everything got easier. It was like a weight shifted off my shoulder. I was fully supported, and suddenly not having to hide it and creep around almost in the shadows because of that stigma. And just for having that backing of my line managers, it changed everything for me.
Yeah. Sorry, Becky, do you want to add to that?
I was just wanting to add, because obviously Sean kind of speaks around that kind of shame and the stigma was being a huge reason why people don't feel comfortable sharing. But I think particularly as well from a female perspective, when somebody is going through this, it's often talked about the motherhood penalty in the workplace. And somebody said the other day when I was on a hosting an event, actually, it's like the motherhood penalty, but sooner, and you are effectively having to show your hand and say that we are actively trying for a baby before you even know whether you're pregnant, and what will that mean for your career. And we've had some awful stories about people, they were in line for that promotion, but because they're going through fertility treatment, promotion's been given to somebody else. And all of these different things that will be at the back of the mind of your employee when they are making that decision as to whether or not to disclose. So it's not just a policy, as I was mentioning before, there's a lot of work to be done around culture as well when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I mean, I can understand what Sean's saying, but from a female perspective, you worry, and you're disclosing we're trying for kids when no one else will have to do that if they're doing things naturally, and it's only natural. Unfortunately, it can color people's decisions then when they're thinking about, is that individual going to be around if we promote them or whatever? And like I say, no one else has to do that. Stephanie, again, going back to that kind of holistic well-being and nutritional side of things, what advice would you give individuals? You talked a little bit, but kind of some specific advice in terms of how to go about replenishing their reserves, because it's such a stressful and demanding time. What are some kind of key pillars that you would suggest people need to try and stick by?
I think there's two things here. I think there's the individual for themselves, and then there's the organization as a whole. And I think what I'm seeing as I go on and on is that organizations are much more willing to listen, and individuals are much more willing to talk, which is just amazing, because the tide is starting to turn. There are, from a biomedical point of view, biomechanistic point of view, there are chemicals in almost everything that we're doing. And there's a good, better, best approach, because lots of individuals are overwhelmed as it is. So if you start talking about this, they're just going to go, good night, God bless, and then walk out. So we have to be very, very nurturing and very supportive of a good, better, best. So for example, the good is just knowing about this stuff, knowing that actually heating up plastic in a microwave might cause that chemical to leach into the food, and that's going to act as a hormone disruptor. when your estrogen levels, whether you're going through menopause, perimenopause, or whether you're trying to increase your sperm fertility, sperm count, there's chemicals that are in the food that are going to act like hormones, and they're going to kind of dock onto these receptors and not allow your natural hormones to go in. That's like the oversimplification of it. So by switching to glass or by switching to ceramic, if you can stretch to that, then that is a really good thing for you to do for your body. If you can eat as clean as possible, that's going to keep your body in balance. And then from a mindset and emotional point of view, having that confidence and that courage to talk and to be heard. And from an organization's point of view, just staying open-minded and listening and giving that support. Sean just said it so beautifully. The minute that he started talking, everything changed. And Becky's running this wonderful campaign. People, we're talking now. We are so much braver now than we ever were. And we're not willing to just be sat here. And I know I'm in menopause, and it's like the other end to the lifestyle. But we're all talking the menopause policies, the fertility policies, the maternity policies, this flexible working, this environment where we're asking people to talk. They're all going hand in hand, and people are wanting to talk and be heard.
Thank you. I know there's not anything, medically or cures in terms of some of these conditions. So, where people will have fertility challenges, particularly women. But any, quick dietary strategies, to help assist with things like polycystic ovary syndrome or endometriosis, Stephanie, that you've come across?
Yeah, so endometriosis is just tissue, overgrowth of tissue. And at the moment, there's no cure for it. The kind of best thing that the GPs and the allopathic world can offer is to have an operation to get rid of that excess tissue. From a naturopathic point of view, the best way that we can the best way that we can support our clients is an anti-inflammatory diet. So there's things like turmeric, there's things like oily fish that are going to keep that inflammation down. But from a mindset point of view, I've seen women going through this who are just totally at a loss of where to go because there's nowhere to go. So the best support that you can offer is to kind of look at that diet and that anti-inflammatory diet, and then support them as best you can if they go down that operation route. From a PCOS point of view, it's polycystic ovary syndrome is like an overgrowth of testosterone. So they're going to have hirsutism, they're going to have hair growing in different places, and their blood sugar is going to be dysregulated. So they're going to be insulin resistant. So I always say to my client that I prefer continuous glucose monitor, which is that patch that sits on the bottom of your arm. It's this one here. So you can get it from Freestyle Libre. They're becoming more and more kind of mainstream now. And I start with there rather than the scales, because you can see by having this patch on, and it's almost like, how an Oyster card, you tap your phone on the Oyster card and it opens the door. It's the same. You can read your balance, and you can kind of read your blood sugar and how food is affecting you. So if we have that clean diet and we're eating cleanly, but we're having a banana might spike your blood sugar, and that's going to disrupt your hormones. So it's really going under the bonnet to see how foods are affecting you from an individual point of view. I can go on, but I feel like
I know it's a big topic in itself, so we won't go into too much. But thank you. And so Becky, on that point, because a lot of women in particular, but probably lots of men who may not even know about it. But we were just talking about things like endometriosis. That's a challenge throughout your career, because even if you're younger and you're not yet looking to start a family, you're dealing with that, because we know it can be really painful, disruptive, and hard, to come into work and be bright and breezy. So those are really varied and complicated issues for employers who may wish to support, but how do they go about educating individual line managers and leaders? Because it can be perceived that, that person's just kind of not turning up once a month and being really difficult.
Yeah, and I think it can feel quite overwhelming for employers, actually. Oh, it's another thing, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. And I think it's about maybe looking at the whole kind of reproductive life cycle, whether it's from kind of menstrual health through to conditions such as endometriosis, PCOS, fertility challenges, right through to menopause as well. And for employees, it's very much about having that awareness. Managers can't know everything about everything. So what have you got in place in terms of training? That's another reason why guidance and policy is so important, so that managers have some structure around certain things. But I mean, we're all, I think everyone of us on this call are all very, very big advocates for raising awareness, and sharing stories can make such a difference. So there are organisations, I know through Fertility Matters at Work, we have experts that can come in and talk about endometriosis from a medical perspective, PCOS as employee supports, but also for managers to learn more as well. So I think it's not about setting our expectations too high for managers, but how can we give the tools? And we often talk about putting in place an employee support pathway through these things, but also a manager support pathway as well, so that they are equipped and empowered to be able to support people with different conditions at different stages of their reproductive life cycle.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because it can be bewildering, particularly if they've no personal experience in their family or partner or whatever, then that's really a bit overwhelming. And they unintended, issues then will occur. Sean, from your perspective, how does that workplace culture influence employees' comfort in terms of discussing fertility issues with maybe their manager or their colleagues? So, was that one of your blockers maybe, and if so, have you any tips for employers who are looking to foster a kind of inclusive, open culture where employees can feel comfortable discussing challenges without any fear or worry?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I take it back to my workplace at the time when I was going through it, it was a kind of high banter environment, and one which I enjoyed and I was very much part of. But the problem is with that is that I thought that by opening up and saying about my very personal struggles, especially from the male perspective, that I'd be essentially throwing myself to the wolves and would become the subject of that. So I think in environments like that, and it can be healthy, to break up the monotony of a day, and to create a good morale is to have that environment where people are able to have a laugh and a joke throughout the day. But it's about questioning what the subjects are, because if for example that banter is about someone, that's not banter, that's bullying. So it's to foster that. Is anyone ever being the subject of a bit of Mickey taking here or there? Well, understand actually that should be stamped out pretty early on, really. And of course we all know where there are lines, but lines shouldn't need to be met or even crossed. It's about, if you can't make jokes and have fun about it that doesn't revolve around someone, then you really need to question yourself and what you think is funny. So that, because of that environment, I was a lot less likely to come forward. And when I did, I put it in email, because I just couldn't face doing it for another reason, which was kind of around the setup of my office as well. But so yeah, it's look at your workplace environment. What is it like, and how are people engaging with that? And it's just making it a place where everyone feels comfortable to bring their real selves, their real authentic selves, and make everyone feel welcome and able to share as and when they need to.
Yeah. And thinking about men in particular, Sean, what tips would you have for employers, to try and support men in particular who find it difficult to open up? I mean, I get that certain environments might be more challenging than others. But is there anything else you'd say to employers they could do specifically for men, to encourage them to talk and not suffer in silence like you clearly did?
Absolutely, yeah. So even if your general work environment is one thing, you can still create alternate environments. So mine was a big open plan office. I didn't have I didn't have a laptop, so I couldn't be looking at the intranet away from eyes, and there was no chance I was going to sit looking at 4 fertility policies when people are over my shoulder all the time. So, and that also was a problem as to why I couldn't and wouldn't come forward to speak to my line managers in person, because we would have an annual review about our performance, and that was it. other than that, if people were going to have a chat with the managers, it's because the assumption for everyone else is that they're in trouble. Yeah. So have regular meetings, go for a coffee with your staff, like weekly, bi-weekly, whatever you can do in the environment, because then it gives people the opportunity to actually say, look, do you know what? Yeah, work-wise, this, that, the other, let's have that chat. But at home, there's something going on. I just want to let you know because it's impacting me at work, because we're at work for so much of our waking hours in a week that it's natural that it's going to have an impact at work. We're not robots. We can't just switch off what we're going through physically, mentally, emotionally. And it gives that chance to then have those chats in private without going up to your line manager and saying, can we go and have a chat, and seeing heads turn. Or, that's I think an absolute basic and an easy thing to do. But then you could look at other things like having support groups, like kind of men's breakout areas or whatever, for everyone, but just make everyone inclusive. But with men, it's really about giving them the opportunity to talk.
Yeah. I mean, and that goes for anything in terms of overall employee well-being. If you get to know your staff and the people around you and your colleagues, they're more likely to talk to you, aren't they? So just making that effort, but not making it such a big deal to
Absolutely.
go and have a chat. Sounds, yeah.
I just add to that, Claire. I think that's such a good point. And we, as a female, we've seen that male banter, and you kind of want to skirt around it because to be caught up in it is just quite intimidating under the surface. You can put on a jovial face and laugh. But I think going to speak to your manager, and I think empowering the manager with these tools, because some men, some women don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to broach a subject. They don't know how to support their staff. So I think that it's so brave for you to have even sent that email, Sean. My hat is off to you. But then it's about empowering the managers to have those conversations and to either signpost or to hold that space to know what to do.
Yeah, my managers in that situation, they had no experience of this. They had their own children naturally, but what came through there was the fact that they were in those positions because they were good people and leaders. They were good, empathetic listeners. They didn't know what to say, but crucially, they didn't say the wrong thing.
Yeah, they had the emotional intelligence to realize this is important. I might not know about it, but I'll go off and I'll make sure, and support you. And you'd hope most leaders are, but they may not be, and you just got to find that individual to talk to. Yeah. And Becky, I mean, we've talked about it, and we've talked about how all-consuming fertility treatment can be, because it's such a it's just so random and so ongoing, and during the week, at times when you're busiest at work and with the rest of life. So what advice do you have for individuals who want to try and find a bit of balance and not be completely overwhelmed, and all they do is live, breathe and think about this all the time, which can only add to the whole stress of the situation?
Yeah, I think I completely empathize if anybody is feeling that at the moment. I remember being completely all consumed by it. And what really helped me was finding other people who really understood, who got it. And at the time, for me, it was sort of 10 years ago, I was Googling through NetMums forums and different things to find people. But there are more and more people talking about it now. Find others that you can speak to, because actually, I think once you start sharing and somebody validates what you're going through, it really does lift a lot of that burden for you. But there's a phrase that I heard that has always stuck with me that I wish I'd have heard at the time, which was, "Don't let trying stop you from living." And very often we put so many things on hold when we're going through fertility treatment, whether it be, or I can't book that holiday because what if this treatment works, then I might be pregnant, or what if it doesn't work, then we need the money for another round of IVF, and so many different things you put on hold. Or I'm not drinking, so I can't go on that hen night, I can't do XYZ. It's about trying to find that balance and still do things that bring you joy. I think is so important. And definitely there were times where I lost myself and I kind of lost that ability to think, actually, what do I need as an individual? I became so focused on the fertility journey. So finding your community is really important. Actually, Instagram is a brilliant place to find. If you search the hashtags TTC, IVF, you'll find that's where Sean and I met, through Instagram, through those squares. Can be really helpful, but also just making sure that you take that time for you as well, and recognize that there are other things in your life that can still bring you joy whilst you're going through this uncertainty. And I think the uncertainty is probably one of the hardest things to navigate. Will it ever work? When will it work? Who will I be if it doesn't? All of those different things.
Yeah, exactly. So just trying to get on with life rather than putting everything on hold. And Becky, given your campaign and the work you do with Fertility Matters, I'd like to explore kind of the financial aspect, because there are some real financial implications of fertility treatment. We talked about LGBTQ plus couples as well, and not everyone will get fertility treatment through the NHS or whatever. So how could an employer help even in a small way, even if it's around, an organization's parental leave or healthcare policies? They won't always have money to throw at it, or if they could, that's great. But what have you seen that's good practice in that sense?
Yeah, there are lots of different things that employers can do to help relieve the financial burden. And in the UK, it is very much a postcode lottery, depending on where you live, as to whether you qualify for treatment. But there are so many other parameters that can exclude people, whether it's BMI, whether your partner has a child from a previous relationship, whether it's your hormone levels, which is what excluded me from having been eligible for treatment. And so many people are using their savings and their kind of the future pot that they may have had for their future children just to have a chance at having a baby. And that's the thing, it's a chance, it's not a guarantee at the same time. But there are some things that employers can do. I think the first thing is allow paid time off for these appointments. I hear from so many people who are taking unpaid leave or using all of their annual leave literally to go for medical appointments. So that's one thing you can do to relieve that burden. You don't have to be paying for full treatment like your Googles and your big organizations, although that can be hugely, hugely helpful and a real talent attraction. There are kind of smaller things that employers can do, whether it be some money towards fertility testing, whether it be, we've seen organisations provide a loan, which is interest free, that they can have up to £1,000, £5,000 to which they can put towards treatment and then pay back through their salary. So these little things that don't cost a huge amount to the employer can make such a significant difference to employees. And I think this whole thing, when we're talking about support for this particular life event, eventually we're coming back to how to keep our employees engaged, and the amount of loyalty we hear from employees who have been supported by their employer. We're looking at retaining those employees. We actually found that 36% of people considered leaving their jobs whilst going through treatment, and I was one of those. So you will be losing talent. You may not know why, but this is a significant reason. And also attraction as well. And we actually did a piece of work with Zurich back in 2022 where they had launched their policy internally, they'd done a survey internally, and they had some results they wanted to share through a PR campaign. We spoke on BBC News, Sky News, about what they've been doing. And they actually found on the back of that, they had a 25% uplift in visits to their recruitment page and 11% uplift in applications. And so it's very hard when we talk about these things to find tangible, this is going to be the effect with you putting this in place. But I think that's a really strong signal that people are looking for this. And this is something that employers should be considering and really actually shouting about if you're supporting this as well, because you are probably one of the leaders at the moment. We're still seeing that uptake, and very much the organisations that we work with at Fertility Matters at Work are leading the way in changing culture around this as a topic.
Yeah, so they're the trailblazers and they're getting some benefit, which is great. Yeah, as you say, kind of shouting about it and talking about it, that's great PR for them. But also helps your organization to tell other employers, actually, here's some tangible benefits. So that's not a good stats. Sean, in your experience, how accessible, I mean, I don't know whether you had any access to fertility related benefits, but if that was an option, and it is an option for people, how would you advise people to approach using them without thinking I'm going to be judged here or it'll impact on my career, particularly as a man?
Yeah, I mean, in my case, I don't know if there was anything at the
Yeah.
time because I didn't look. I was fortunate to have won the line manager lottery and was well looked after by them. But actually, that employer are working with fertility matters at work with Becky, so I know that they are looking to improve what they do there. But yeah, in terms of in general, if there is like policies and practices in place, then use them because it's you cannot put a price on just how much, like I said, just opening up lifted a weight from my shoulders, but having that support as well. Even from having that support, I would run through brick walls for those line managers. I haven't worked for them since 2020. I'm still in the same employer organization, but I still speak to them
Yeah.
because I just have so much respect for them. And it just shows that if you're a company that's looking to improve your recruitment and retention, keep the talent you've got. It's cheaper, and just support them because we're all, like I said, we're all human beings. We've all got stuff going on. Obviously, in this case, we're talking specifically about fertility. People will really respect and just be so grateful for any support they can get.
Yeah, no, that yeah resonates a lot. Um, Stephanie, could I ask you this question? Now, it's not one I actually mentioned, but I think it kind of goes back to where you said, you know, at the start, in terms of your journey, you had to make that actual active decision. Now, I'm aware that all of our speakers here have now got kids, and you're all very lucky. But, you know, there are going to be people listening to this who go through fertility treatment and actually they're also making not an active, well, it is an active decision where you just think, I can't do this anymore because it is so unrelenting and difficult. And that's a decision as well. And it's an active decision, kind of similar to you. You had to make it for a medical reason because of that gene, but you know, it's an active decision in terms of, right, I'm now going to not continue on with this. So you made the decision to go ahead with that operation. So how you would advise people to come to terms with that decision?
Oh my goodness, that's a 64,000 question. Yeah. How can you advise? I don't think you can advise. I think you can just support and accept where people are in order to process their grief, because there is a grieving period, and either they will step into a new form or a new version of themselves, or they will carry on until they do. And until they do, the best that we can do is support them. I would never advise anyone on how to do that because it's a period of grief and processing. And so, yeah, I just have to honor their feelings, honor where they are on that journey. For me, it was much easier because I have my two kids, and so there was no loss. You know, I focused my attention on that. And even when I lost my own mum, I stepped into the best version of myself. It was the version that she had always brought me up to be. And it was only when we separated, when she passed away, that I stepped into that new version of everything that she had taught me to be, because I was ready. And I went to it was a group of mums without mums. I mean, you couldn't make up this name, you know, what a name. But there were people there that weren't accepting that they had lost their mums, and they weren't ready to. And no amount of advice would have sped up their journey. So my advice is, don't give advice, just be there and support.
Yeah. Becky, I don't know whether your organization also kind of, you know, people go through the journey, but not everyone will end up with children. So do you then signpost individuals anywhere at that point?
Yeah, and I think it's so important that when we're talking about this topic, we're acknowledging those that are childless not by choice. And we offer sessions for organisations where we talk about how to support those people, and it's a lot more than you think. So 1 in 5 women and 1 in 4 men will be childless not by choice, and so it's really, really important to help them feel included. And I think particularly we have so many family-friendly policies and things like that. This group often feel the most isolated. So actually within your support at work, signposting to different organisations. There's a fantastic organisation called Gateway Women, which is run by a wonderful woman called Jodie Day. And there's also a podcast for anybody that you can signpost to called the Full Stop Podcast, which is another one where people share stories, create community, and again, can be really, really helpful for those whose journey has ended without a baby. And yeah, sadly, more often than not, it's those stories that often don't get shared. There's Sean and I are talking now as parents, and we went through a long journey, difficult journey to get there, but we need to acknowledge and really, really make sure that those stories are also included in this conversation.
Yeah, completely agree, because yeah, it's more people than we acknowledge, really. So if this is silent, that's even more silent. But anyway, and in terms, Becky, just going back, I mean, you've mentioned one employer, but policies, practices that you think that you've, I suppose, examples of companies or industries that you're seeing are successfully creating those supportive environments for individuals dealing with fertility, or are they using tech in an innovative way? Is there anything out there, do you think, if someone wants to look as an employer, where would they look?
So there's been some amazing work, and it doesn't necessarily come particularly from one industry, really. We're working with organisations across the board. One I would highlight in particular, who has recently become accredited as fertility friendly, is Eon UK. So as a utility company, they used a network of those with lived experience within their organisation to create the fertility forum, which then informed the policy development, which then created a peer support group, which were called Fertility Friends, who meet regularly. They've held awareness sessions. They've put e-learning in place for line managers. They offer signposting, and they've just really looked at it in a holistic way of how can we change the culture around this, and it's something that's ongoing. So I would signpost to that as an example. They've recently shared that they've become accredited, but we've got lots of information on our website around what you can do with it relating to policy and with becoming fertility friendly as well. So I would say there's lots of free downloads and information. We're also hosting an event in Fertility Week, which is coming up on the 4th of November in London, called the F Word at Work Live, where we're bringing together different experts to talk about this topic. But also there's some free webinars throughout the week as well. So I'd just say just head to the website, which I'm sure we'll be sharing, to find out more about how you as an organisation might be able to do these things.
Great, thank you, Becky. Yeah, we will share all of that and direct people to your organisation. So just to conclude from everybody, maybe one key piece of advice that you'd all give, either to maybe an individual employee, colleague, employer, whatever it is, that in your experience would really make the difference in terms of balancing health and well-being when you were going through this. Sean, could I start with you, please? What would that be from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Quite simply, for men, it is that you're not alone. There are many, many millions of other men experiencing this. So, and there are now people talking about it. So seek it out, get that support, and find your community, because it will help you immensely in navigating this awful situation that you, of course, didn't ask to be in. But yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sean. Stephanie, from your perspective?
I would say to stay curious and stay open. I think there is something massive to be said about communities and to be getting support externally, but also to be tuning into your own needs and what you need and staying very true to yourself.
Thank you. And Becky, from your perspective?
I think for individuals, I would say just be kind to yourself and find somebody within your organisation to speak to, whether if it's not your manager, whether it's someone in HR or just somebody you might know that's been through this. And then just for employers, just as a takeaway action, just go away and have a look, whether you have anything down in writing to support people. What is that first signal that you're giving when it comes to this topic, as a takeaway, just to go, and maybe that can be the place you start when it comes to putting support in place.
Yeah, just a starting point. Great. Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank anyone who joined our session on YouTube. I hope that you found it useful and insightful. There's a lot of actions and also just stuff to think about, but a very big thank you to my wonderful guests this morning. to Becky, to Stephanie, and to Sean. Thank you all for your input, your expertise, and being so honest on such an important conversation. The session has been recorded, and everyone who signed up will receive a recording. Plus, we'll send out again contact details for all the guests and links to their individual organisations and websites. So if you wish to reach out and find out more, I'd encourage you to do so. But thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.